Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
And I know that because I've heard him talk several times. I'm going to read from the introduction that we gave at the Washington Physicians Health Program when he came and spoke there. John McDougall is a frequent lecturer on addiction and recovery at sites as different as Glassboro State College in New Jersey and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Edmonton. He's a graduate of the Princeton Theological Seminary with a master's degree, and he has his doctorate in the sacred arts from Drew University. He has been a radio engineer, a New Jersey Turnpike toll taker, a juvenile probation counselor, a New York City bus driver, an EMT with over 10,000 calls to his credit, a radio program host, a parish pastor, a graduate school instructor, a prison chaplain, and a legend in his own shower. You're in for a treat. John, please step up.
Hi, I'm John. I'm an alcoholic. And I want to talk about hope. I really want to talk about hope because hope works a lot better than fear for recovery. If fear worked better, this would be a talk on fear. I'm very flexible. People might come into treatment or into a diversion program or even into IDAA, the doctors in Alcoholics Anonymous, out of fear of consequences. We might begin our journey out of fear, but we don't stay with recovery. We don't trudge the road of happy destiny because of fear. We do it because we get hope that life will get better. There have been many attempts to motivate addicts out of fear. If you're my age, you may remember a couple of TV programs called Scared Straight, where they take impressionable young people into prison and get the ugliest looking lifers to go, "Don't do what I did or you'll end up here." And it had no results. Then there was the Just Say No program with Nancy Reagan, and that works. Just Say No works till you just say yes. Then it's over. You may have seen the TV ads with the cute young woman and the egg in the frying pan. This is your brain crack. This is your brain on drugs, sizzle. Any questions? I wanted to say, are you free on Friday? You know. She was kind of cute. If you took the average heroin addict and said to that heroin addict, if you use heroin one more time, we're going to cut your legs off with a rusty chainsaw, the reaction would be, I better get really high, that's going to hurt. Oh, no. No, we recover because we develop hope in something better. And we often leave treatment or start our first 90 days in AA with hope, and then it fades away. A common problem comes up maybe 6 months to 2 years into recovery, where we look around and we're going to meetings and we're not drinking, but our destiny doesn't seem that happy yet. And we say, I stopped drinking for this? No, actually, there's a lot more to recovery than just not drinking or just not drugging. Just not drinking and not drugging is not much fun. Nobody says, hey, it's Friday night, let's not drink. Just not drinking is depressing because the focus is on what we cannot have instead of on what we can have. Person comes into treatment for a slight cocaine problem, and the counselor brings up the idea of abstinence from all mood-altering chemicals, and the patient's trying to stay one step ahead and says, you mean I can never drink again? And the counselor says, don't think of it that way. Think of it as one day at a time. Patient's wheels are turning, and they figure, yeah, but if it's one day at a time, and I keep doing one day at a time, it adds up to forever. There's a trap here. See, if you take an alcoholic and all you do for the alcoholic is remove the alcohol from the alcoholic, what you've got left is an ick. You may have been an ick, or you may have known an ick. The native sound of the ick is whining. And whining is simply anger coming through a hole that's too small. I don't think I like this one bit. I was attracted to this. Now, because I work in spiritual care at Hazelden, I think about and I talk about the meaning and purpose of life. And I have a theory that I call the Walmart toaster theory of life. It goes like this. If you went to Walmart and you bought a toaster and you brought it home, and the person you live with said, what's that thing for? You'd say, what do you mean, what's it for? It's a toaster. It's obvious from the design what it's for. You put it on the counter, you plug it in, you put bread in the slots, you press the lever, toast. From the design, you can figure out that a purpose of a toaster is to make toast. Okay, so we come home from this conference with a life, one per customer. What's it for? I think from the design, we can figure out that the purpose of life is to be really alive. Not just here, not just not dead yet, not just a sack of cells metabolizing our way towards oblivion, but all the way alive. Working, playing, loving, being loved, being angry, being happy, being sad, fully experiencing life. And this is important because the human being is the only mammal that will seek to destroy itself if it suspects that life has no meaning. I mean, chipmunks don't have this problem. They don't go around stuffing their face with nuts going, why are we doing this? What does it all mean? They don't think about that, as far as I know. You ever seen a depressed-looking chipmunk? Much drinking and drugging is sustained by the belief that life has no meaning. One of the activities I run on the Silkworth unit where I work is grief group. And I recently gave a patient with a lot of self-destructive behaviors an assignment to write a letter to the peers on how I have been behaving as if my life had no meaning and no value. There's a problem that comes along with our addictions as we get really deeply into our addictions. And I call the problem extreme indifference. I borrowed that phrase, extreme indifference, from New York State law. New York State recognizes different levels of homicide according to the intention of the person who did the killing. And in one of the grades of manslaughter, the charge is not that you meant to kill the person, but that you did something that constituted acting with extreme indifference as to whether they lived or died. And I think sometimes when we're caught up in our addictions, we do that to ourselves. Fairly often, alcoholics and addicts turn up dead of an overdose. But there's no suicide note. So the question is, was it suicide or was it a, quote, accident? Many times it wasn't either one. The person wasn't trying to get dead. What they were trying to get was numb. And the dose required to get numb is so close to the dose required to get dead. that they miscalculate or their tolerance has changed and they die. They kind of know that the dose required to get numb could kill them. They're not trying to die, but they behave with extreme indifference as to whether they live through the episode or not, because they just want to get numb one more time. And if they die, they die. They really don't care. If the desire to be numb is a part of the disease towards the end stage, then the willingness or the desire to go ahead and feel is part of recovery. Being alive is its own point. But for us to get the point, we need to have hope for a better life. So I want to talk briefly about 4 things that give me a sense of hope. And they are reality, gratitude, transformation, and angels. The beginning of reality is getting the chemicals out of our brains. This can be tricky. I started using when I was 10. I got clean and sober when I was 40. So that's 30 years of daily alcohol and or drug use. No sober days for 30 years in a row. So my brain was pretty well awash in chemicals. This has some interesting consequences. I started off being medicated by a physician for the consequences of child abuse. So I was getting beat up at home, and by the time I got to 5th grade, I was sitting in the classroom crying and shaking and throwing up. So they sent me to the nurse, and the nurse sent me to the doctor, and the doctor gave me Librium. So I cried less. So they figured, it's working. So they gave me more Librium. But then I had migraine headaches, so they gave me Fiorinol. And that helped some, and they gave me Fiorinol with codeine, and that helped a little more. So then they added Percodan and Percocet. So by the time I got to what was allegedly my first year of college, I think, if I can remember, which is hazy, all prescribed by the same college student health service. I wasn't even doctor shopping. All from the same group of doctors. I was getting Fiorinol with codeine, little white codeine tablets, Darvon 64, Talwin, Percodan, Percocet, Valium, Librium, Thorazine, Compazine, Stelazine, and I drank. And I still had headaches. And I walked with kind of that state hospital shuffle where you have to constantly rebalance yourself and give your feet specific instructions, like that way, over there, okay. And since I was at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, which is large and rather impersonal, I got my grade slip on a pink piece of paper with the word dropped stamped in large red letters, which is your sign to go away. But like many other addicts, I discovered if you get in one more time, then you're thrown out. And you live long enough, you graduate. Okay. And so I went to Princeton Theological Seminary for my master's degree the same way and flunked and got back in. And if you get in more times than you flunk out and you live long enough, you graduate. I have this big diploma in my office, about 3 feet tall. It's huge. And it's in Latin, and it's got a gold seal on it, something about the New World Order and the sun rising or something. And so I have this diploma I can't read from a school I can't remember, but I'm educated. And the inverse square law of prestige applies. The farther you are from Princeton, the more prestigious it is to have gone to school there. If you're in Princeton, you say, I graduated. They said, didn't everyone? Okay. See, we have magnificent brains, but when they're drugged, unacceptable things become acceptable. For example, you get surgery with local anesthetic. With the right combination of fentanyl and Versed, you will lie still and smile while strangers wearing masks cut you with knives. It's not something you would normally accept, okay? Now, when the chemicals are gone, suddenly we have all these feelings, and the first round of feelings that show up when the chemicals leave our bodies are often painful because we've paved over our painful feelings with drugs and alcohol. So the first wave of feelings that arrive when we're newly sober are often quite objectionable. One of my little mnemonics to help me remember things is the word sober is an acronym. The letters SOBER stand for son of a bitch, everything's real. Oh no. But if we'll let that wave of pain flow over us and then let it recede, we can begin to get in touch with reality. Many years ago, I taught a course in chemical dependency at Glassboro State College in southern New Jersey, and our guest lecturer, one of our guest lecturers, was Dr. Professor Wolfgang Vogel, professor of psychoneuropharmacology at Jefferson University Medical School. I always remember Dr. Vogel, his accent, and he would say to the class, there is no such thing as the mind, there is only the brain. But you must understand what the brain is. It is one honey of a computer. It contains billions of circuits, hundreds of thousands of which can run at the same time without becoming unduly confused. It can run for 2 hours on the energy of a single peanut. It is completely mobile, and he would walk up and down the stage with his lavalier mic. It can run continuously for 24 hours a day for 60 to 100 years with no scheduled maintenance or downtime required. It comes in its own waterproof, shock-resistant container. And best of all, it can be mass-produced inexpensively by unskilled labor. And we've all got one. And when the chemicals leave, it starts to work. Okay? And when it starts to work, we're capable of thinking. And so once we've detoxed and somebody hands us a big book and we start to read it, we can get in touch with reality. What is the reality? Page 60 of the big book says, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if he were sought. Oh, okay, let's go look for him. Why didn't I think of that? Because I was too drunk to think. But once I sobered up and read the book and heard about it at meetings, it started to make sense. I got back in touch with reality. Reality gives me hope. Another source of hope is gratitude. Vincent van Gogh, who I realize is not a model of recovery, still managed to say, the best way to know God is to love many things. The more in love with life we can become, the more well we become. One of our counselors, now retired at Hazelden, George Weller, was fond of saying, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Think about it. If golf is worth doing, before you can do it well, you have to do it poorly. You can't just step out on a golf course and do well right off the bat. See, we have to enjoy doing things poorly before we can do them well. My life is unmanageable only when I'm trying to manage it. Who says I have to manage my life? My life isn't meant to be managed, it's meant to be lived. And in recovery, we get the gifts of mindfulness and of living in the day. I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm not thinking about yesterday. I'm actually here. You're actually here. We can do this right now and hopefully have some enjoyment and fun while we're doing it. One of the errors that earth people or normies make and that we often make with them is we spend 40% of our available energy in the past in the form of resentment or regret, and 40% of our energy in the future in the form of anxiety or worry. And only 20% of our life energy is available for today. As we really get into this AA one day at a time business and turning things over to our higher power, we can live with 5% of our energy in the past in the form of respect for our heritage and our history, 5% in the future in the form of planning, and 90% of our life can be here, right now. Life becomes fun when we begin to trust God, trust the process, trust our higher power, trust AA, trust life. Garrison Keillor once wrote, "God writes great comedy, but is stuck with poor players who don't know that their lines are funny." In recovery, we start to notice that our lines actually are funny. I ask patients in a lecture hall, count the number of days you've been here, whether it's 2 days, 20 days, whatever. Count the same number of days before you came here. During which time period have you laughed more? Almost invariably, they have laughed more in treatment than they did before treatment, because we're getting well and we are relieved of the burden of trying to be our own higher power. And we laugh even at things that aren't funny. It's the laughter of freed hostages. We've been rescued. Big Book talks about people in a lifeboat laughing that their lives have been saved. And we discover our lines are funny. I was at a meeting at the Uptown Club in St. Paul, which is a big Victorian house where there isn't one big assembly room, so people break up into small groups throughout the house. And at the end of the evening, they come together and meet each other and go off for coffee here and there. And it's the end of the evening in the middle of winter. And I saw a woman who was 6 months sober and not enjoying her sobriety one bit. And this is back in the days of videotapes before DVDs. And she had 3 videotapes to return to Blockbuster, and they still charged $1.50 late charge at that time. And she's carrying on to no one in particular about the fact that she doesn't want to pay a late charge on these videos. She's just talking to the room and saying, if they think they're going to get $4.50 out of me, they got another thing coming. 8 o'clock is too early to have those tapes back. I had to go to AA, like Blockbuster should care. She had to go to AA. I'm just going to walk in there, put them on the counter, walk out. Anybody says anything to me, I'm never coming back. I'm never going to. I'm not paying $4.50. And she's waving her arms and backing up, and she bumps into this guy who's got a broken neck. He's got that halo and a big frame on his shoulders, and and she backs into him. She turns around and goes, "What is that?" He says, "I got a broken neck." She goes, "Oh," Somebody else comes up to him and says, "Hey, Frank, how you doing? How's the bolts in your head?" He says, "Oh, pretty good. When I got a screw loose, somebody can tighten it." And they're laughing, and she goes, "Oh, that's awful. They don't screw that right into your skull." I says, "Oh, yeah, they bolt it right into my skull." She says, "Oh, that's disgusting. How did you break your neck?" He says, "I was in a car accident." She says, "Oh, that's terrible. Were you driving drunk?" He says, "No, I was sober 4 days. Ain't that a bitch?" And he's laughing, and she goes, "That's so unfair. That's awful." He says, "Oh, I feel pretty lucky." She goes, "Lucky? What's lucky about it?" He said, "Well, the other driver was killed." He says, "I got friends in intensive care." He says, "I'm walking around. The doctor says 6 or 8 weeks, the halo come off, I'll end up kind of stiff, and that's it." She goes, "Oh," she says, "how do you sleep in that thing?" He said, "In shifts, a little bit at a time." And he's laughing, and his friends are helping him get his winter parka on. They've gotten this winter parka, and they've sliced it down the seams and put Velcro on it, so they can kind of paste him in his parka, and they're patching him up there to go outside. And finally, she's adjusting to this gruesome sight, and she says, "Well, I guess you have a point. I guess it could be worse." And somebody said, "Yeah, they could charge you $6. We discover that our lines actually are funny. I'm grateful to be alive and free, to be sober, and a lot more. I'm grateful to my wife, Priscilla. Been married 32 years. The last 19 of them have been sober, but she was with me through the drinking too. My slogan is, relationships should be with someone I can get old with, not someone I get old because of. Grateful to my friends who share my sense of adventure and absurdity. and my AA friends and I at work, we deal with our character defects in large measure by satirizing them. So we have some interesting hallway dramas there at Hazelden. Like many of us, I suffer from grandiosity, and so I make fun of it. And my good friend there, Deborah Berg, is the supervisor of spiritual care, and I'm the director, so I'm her boss. So one morning, first thing in the morning, I went down to her office, and she was in her office with her friend Mary, and I walked into the office and said, as we begin our day, we ask ourselves this question: what can I do today for Dr. McDougall? And I walked out. And I came back at 4:30 and said, as we review the events of our day, we ask ourselves this question: have I done everything I possibly could for Dr. McDougall? And she goes, no, it's all about me, Deborah Berg. And the other woman says, no, it's all about me, Mary Eckberg. And we dissolve in a puddle of laughter. So we make fun of ourselves. I'm grateful to Hazelden. It's a great place to work with good ethics, and they bring all these alcoholics together for me to work with. It's like a playground. I pick up my check every 2 weeks and say, the con is working, they paid me again. All right. I've always needed to respect the place I work. The introduction referred to working for the Jersey Turnpike, which is probably not many people's idea of a dream job. But you know, it's the safest road in America. And if you break down, you get prompt road service at a fair price. I drove 104 Broadway for New York City Transit Authority, not normally seen as a deeply humanitarian job. But I drove it in a humane way. If there was an older person or a woman with kids in a stroller, I didn't just pull away from the bus stop going, ha, ha, ha. You know, I would wait for people and help them get aboard and be nice to folks. And sometimes New Yorkers were a little bit unhappy with this delay and would express themselves. And I'm from New York, so I knew better than to say, I'm trying to drive a compassionate bus here. That just wouldn't fly. So when people would complain, let's get going, I'd say, hey, it's my bus. You want it different? Get your own bus. They could understand that, you know. But I've also noticed something I call the spirituality of place. There's 512 acres at Hazelden Center City, and it feels different there because of all the people who have recovered there. People say, I feel different driving up the driveway. A green field at Gettysburg National Park feels different than a green field at Yellowstone National Park because one had a terrible amount of blood spilled in it and the other did not. This room feels different now than when some other group is in it because of all the recovery in the room. And I'm grateful that places pick up a spirit according to the recovery that has been there. And I'm grateful for the chance to speak to you this morning. I'm grateful to AA for the obvious reasons. That's where sobriety happens. It may have started in treatment for some of us, but AA is where my spirituality, my recovery is maintained. And frankly, AA is the only place where I really fit in as more or less either normal or no more abnormal than everyone else. One of the consequences of getting beat up too much as a kid is having brain damage from being hit in the head too much. And so I have still have migraine headaches and small seizures from scarring in the brain. And one thing that bothers me is fluorescent lights, especially if they're flickering a little from a bad ballast. It's like chalk on the chalkboard is to sound. That's what it is to my migraine. So I have trouble with fluorescent light. And one of my meetings is in a basement with fluorescent lights. It's a great meeting otherwise, so I still go. But one time I asked the group, I said, I have a question for the group conscience. Some days it just really hurts to be here. Would you mind awfully? And one guy says, I'm not having a candlelight meeting. I said, oh, no, let me finish. Would you mind if I use one of those airline sleep masks to cut out the fluorescent light? I'll remember who you are and I'll participate. I just can't deal with the light. And they said, yeah, sure, fine. So as far as I know, I'm still the only person who's going to that meeting like this, you know. Hi, I'm John. I'm an alcoholic with a headache. Hi, John, you know. Today we're on step 3. And so one day somebody said, look, I'm really okay with this. Really, I am. I'm just kind of wondering, about if a newcomer comes, because they're going to really wonder about this program. With you sitting there with a sleep mask on. And I said, well, don't worry, just if a newcomer comes, while I can't see him, just clue me in and let me know, and I'll go, And they didn't throw me out. They laughed, so that it's very tolerant, Alcoholics Anonymous is.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
When we can become grateful for the crisis, when we can get grateful for the pain, the crisis, the disaster, the consequences that got us into this program. None of us come into AA in the middle of a winning streak. It just doesn't happen. When we can become grateful for the problem, the pain that got us into recovery, then we're really rocking and rolling with AA. Big Book says this on page 25, the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. There's no way I could have dug myself out of my pit. It couldn't possibly have happened. And there's no way I can stay out of the pit. Why? Because I'm a natural-born alcoholic and addict. And as I mentioned in the other talk, all I need to do to relapse is nothing at all. It will come naturally. The idea of transformation gives me hope. Transformation is very important, and it's different than change. Change is something we can do. Change is something I can do. I change my clothes. I change a tire on a car. I can even change my mind on some topics. So change is pretty ordinary. Cognitive behavioral therapy is aimed at change. Education is aimed at change. But transformation is something that comes from a power greater than ourselves. Transformation happens when God takes something that is bad, turns it inside out, and transforms it into something good. Doesn't abolish the bad thing, but transforms it into something good. It isn't gone, but it's transformed. Our alcoholism, our addiction, is not gone. There are no ex-alcoholics and addicts here, I assume. But my alcoholism, my addiction, has been transformed from a curse to a blessing. If there was an option to be a normie, which I don't think there is, but you couldn't sell it to me. I'm enjoying being an alcoholic and an addict. There's an edge to it. People in NA embrace the edge a little more than people in AA do. People in NA sharpen that edge. In 2000, the AA convention was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In 2000, the NA convention was in Cartagena, Colombia. In your face. Our addiction becomes transformed into something way worth having. To give an idea how radical, how extreme this transformation is, I'll take a quick detour into the realm of religion and take the Christian symbol of the cross. What's a cross? It's a tool for executing people very, very slowly so they suffer a whole lot before they die. Its purpose is to torture and kill the victim and to terrify everyone else into strict obedience. So as a reality, it is all bad. There's no good part. And yet somehow, God has transformed this tool of execution into something suitable for jewelry for little girls. What has happened? Now, to get this, imagine for a moment a religion whose central symbol was the electric chair. On Sundays, we have a table in front of the church with a white cloth on it and a gold-plated electric chair. On Communion Sundays, we put a Barbie doll in the electric chair and zap her. And the congregation stands up and we sing the hymn, "So I'll cherish my old electric chair, to my trophies at last I lay down. And I'll cling to that old electric chair and exchange it someday for a crown." You'd say these people are sick. But this is precisely what has happened here. Something all bad has been transformed. Acts of mercy are carried out by the Red Cross. Health insurance is Blue Cross. Industrial safety is Green Cross. Health and welfare ministries are Golden Cross. Something all bad has become something all good. God has transformed it. And God transforms us through these programs. Big Book says so. Page 124. Cling to the thought that in God's hands the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. Your dark past. We do a lot of fifth steps at Hazelden, and a lot of people have the idea, I'll write out my fourth step, I'll tell my fifth step to the spiritual care person, and then I'll put it behind me. And I'll never look back, and I'll be free from dumping the bad things in my fifth step. And we ask them, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't dump it. If you put something behind you, it's well positioned to bite you in the butt. Write it all down in your searching and fearless moral inventory. Admit it out loud to God, yourself, and another human being. But there are more steps. It's not a 5-step program. In step 6, become ready to have God remove not the dark past, but to remove the character defects that made that dark past possible. And then in step 7, take that dark past and offer it to God to have it transformed. 7-step prayer says, God, I offer to you all of me, good and bad. Remove from me, not the bad stuff, remove from me the defects of character that stand in the way of my usefulness to you. What's useful to God? All of me, the good and the bad. Because if I put the bad parts of me, my dark past, in God's hands, God will transform that into the key to life and happiness for others. Whatever is the most shameful, the most dreadful, the most evil thing we've ever done, admit it to God, ask for the character defects to be removed, and then offer it back in your 7-step prayer right out of the book to be useful to God. And it will be the key to life and happiness for some other alcoholic or addict. At the right time, God will use you to free someone else. In that, they will be transformed, and we are transformed. It's one drunk helping another over a cup of coffee, but it's the power of God that flows through you at that time. Well, I got one more theme. Gives me a source of hope. That is the idea of angels. Now, I have a nice angel print in my office by Abbott Henderson Thayer. It's about what you would expect, a pretty young woman with a white, probably bedsheet toga and white wings and a blue background, looking angelic, very peaceful. And I'm fine with that kind of angel. I'm less fine with the fictionalized, syrupy, sweet angels on television. But there's another meaning to angel, which is every bit as human and tangible as you or I. In the language of the Greek New Testament, the word angelos is translated as Los Angeles, obviously, as angel, but also as the root word of announcer. In the Hebrew scriptures, the word malach is translated as angel, also translated as messenger. Anyone who carries a message of hope to you is in that moment being your angel. It's a job description, like librarian, physician, or firefighter. They don't have to be personally angelic. They may be very part-time, casual angel, not full-time. They may have no idea they're being an angel. They're being used by your higher power to carry you the message. Our 12 steps says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. We tried to become angels. I think there's already been times when you've met someone, and after a while you come to believe there's a higher power purpose behind your meeting, and you may have been in the presence of an angel, whether they were well known to you or unknown to you. They were serving God by bringing you the message you needed that day. They may have thoroughly annoyed you some other day. They weren't in their angel role. Some examples. I used to live in northern New Hampshire in a little town, and I would go to pick up my mail at the post office. They didn't have delivery. And there's a whole bunch of these brass boxes with little dials, and you dial your combination, you get your mail out. And I would run into a woman named Sharon who was chemically dependent, anorexic, promiscuous, and anxious. And she would tell me all her troubles, oblivious to the fact that she's entertaining the postal workers behind these boxes. And one day she's telling me all her troubles. I said, Sharon, wait a minute. Why don't you try this? Just pick one thing you need help with and ask your higher power for help with just one thing and see what happens. She says, I need help slowing down. I got to go. And she's gone. 3 days later, I saw her in the post office. I said, how you doing? Terrible. I said, what happened? I got a speeding ticket. I said, okay, let's think this through. Where did you get the speeding ticket? Up by Ron's garage. I said, well, Sharon, you've lived in this town 15 years. You've had every opportunity to know that the one cop on duty at a time sits by Ron's garage in the bushes. It's a steep downhill, 2 right-angle turns feeding into a school zone. How fast was the ticket? She says, 53. So you're coming down a hill, you look like a hot prospect, he flips on the radar, dashboard says 5-3, flips on the blue lights, and then what happens? A uniformed messenger hands you a note that says, slow down. What did you want from your higher power? Another Sunday, I was serving 2 churches that were 8 miles apart, and I had finished preaching in both churches. And I was at home reading the New York Times. My wife was making a nice dinner. Everything was peaceful. And I sat up abruptly, and I said to her, I have to go to the other town. She said, why? I said, I don't know, but I got to go, and I left. Well, she's used to my being odd. And I drove the 8 miles agitated. Really, something's wrong. And I don't have psychic powers. I don't have auras or chakras or premonitions or nothing. But I'm really agitated. Driving the 8 miles, I think there must be a fire or a wreck. I'm on the local rescue squad, and something's awful. And I drove the 8 miles to the other town. Nothing is happening. The church is intact, the town hall, the senior center, the village green with a little bandstand on it. Nothing is wrong. I'm sitting there thinking, are you more crazy than normal or what? So I'm sitting there, and as I'm sitting there in my car with the engine running, car comes down the hill, driven by a parishioner of mine from that church. She blows through 2 stop signs, pulls out on the state highway, takes off. So I followed her. She sped up. I sped up. I got a Volvo. I could stick right on her tail. We finally got to the very sharp curves east of town. She pulled over. I pulled over right behind her, walked up to her window like a traffic cop, knocked on the window. She rolled it down about 2 inches. And I said, why am I following you? She said, I was going to kill myself. I left a note for the children. I said, well, would you come to coffee with me instead? She says, no. I thought, what do I do now? Oh. I said, well, I'm not going away. And I stood there. It felt like forever. It was probably less than a minute. And she agreed to go to coffee with me, and we had a long, long talk about her troubles. Turns out her troubles were aggravated by her drinking problem, and she joined the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, is still alive 20-some years later. We're still friends. Why did I drive the 8 miles? Because I'm particularly angelic? Don't count on it. Because I was available. That's what it was. I was available to get up and go. I could be agitated out of my seat. That was the qualification. Availability, not brilliance or godliness or anything else. I would go, and I did. One more example, and I'll leave you with 2 questions to ponder, I hope. Hope you will. As I mentioned, part of my history was being badly abused as a child, and one time my mom got particularly angry, which didn't take much. She would have what she called 2 meaty martinis, and followed by Valium and Librium and a little bit of Percodan, and get mean drunk. When she died, the police department put her obituary on the bulletin board next to threat level orange and some guy named Muhammad. But she was mad at me for rubbing my eyes without authorization, and knocked me down and knelt on my chest, and then took her knuckles and squashed both eyeballs into the socket and broke my 2 cheekbones and the nose at the same time. And I went to the emergency room, and because once she passed out, my dad would take me to the emergency room. And the emergency room was as bad as the original beating. I was about 6. And everybody there was yelling at each other and grabbing pieces of me and sticking tubes in me and stuff. And I passed out, or my recollection is of passing out. And when I came to, I was confused and was very cold and very dark. And I came to the frightened conclusion that they had misdiagnosed me as dead and put me in the fridge. And so that was really scary. And then they took me from wherever that was and pushed the cart into a little room. And there was a woman whose job it was to do cold compresses. So my wrists were tied to the cart, and she'd take a terry cloth washcloth and run it under the cold tap and wring it out and put it on my eyes. And then when it warmed up, she'd run it under the cold tap again and wring it out and put it on my eyes. And she told me if I promised not to touch my face, she'd untie my hands. And I went, uh-huh. And when she had done the compresses for quite a while, she sat with me. And she held my hand, and she said something, but she comforted me. And that was a new experience. I had never experienced being comforted by anybody. And so it was tremendously important that she sat with me and comforted me. And I think eventually I went to sleep. And when I woke up, I keep calling it morning, but who knows. I woke up, the doctors were there. I said, well, let's see what we have here. And what they had there was a real mess. And I went off to surgery. And I spent quite a long time in the hospital, bored out of my tree because my eyes were bandaged. I couldn't see anything. And this is about 1955. And hospitals did not have air conditioning, didn't have television, didn't have radio. And I was in a 6-bed pediatrics ward. And most of the kids there came for one night, for their tonsils out. They'd come in, they'd lie to them about ice cream, they'd spend the night, they'd take their tonsils out and send them home. So there was nobody really to play with or talk to or anything, and I didn't have any visitors. So it was a couple of months in the hospital, extremely boring. And then in time, I kind of forgot about it, along with most of my childhood. And many years later, I was in therapy with a psychiatrist, and he said, well, now we have enough abuse stories to know why you are a dangerous sociopath, but you don't seem to be. So my question is, where did the kindness come from? You cannot have something you never learned. You can't speak German if you never heard German spoken. So where did you first learn kindness? And in time, I remembered her, and she has a huge piece of my psyche, even though I never saw her and met her only once. But she was, in that difficult night, my angel, bringing a message that kindness and care and compassion actually exist in this world. So I would leave you with two questions. The first is, who has been your angel, there may be more than one, who's already carried to you the essential, vital messages of hope, that you're loved, that you matter, that sobriety is possible, that you're worthy of recovery. I think if you give it some thought, you'll find one or more angels have already carried you messages that you must have from God. And then the second question, once you've found your angels, is to whom are you being called in the present to be their angels? Because our program calls on us to become angels. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So my hope is, as a culmination of this conference, not just this talk, but the other speakers, the fellowship, the meetings, the time together, that we've all gotten something from our higher power that we're meant to pass along to another alcoholic, to another addict, in ways large and small, that we are called to become their angels. And I thank you for listening.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.